So, good afternoon, everybody. Like Andrew said, my name is Jamie, and I'll be talking to you about exploring natural lawn care today. So, I'm a horticulture educator with Illinois Extension, and I'm based in Cook County in Chicago. So, first, I wanted to go into really what is the importance of natural lawn care. You might care about how you're using your lawn or what it looks like. We also really care about our lawns because of our watersheds. Everyone who's here on this call today lives in a watershed. A watershed is an area of land in which all the water, so the streams, the rivers, the rainfall, precipitation, all drains into a single body of water. So watersheds can be on a bunch of different scales and sizes. They can be local, they can be regional. And given that we all live in a watershed, and because water drains from all this land around us, we know that our actions affect everyone else downstream and in the watershed. So let's look at the connection between lawns and watersheds a little bit closer. When we're looking at a land surface area map of the United States, like we have here, you can see that the darker the green, the more turf grass area. And so you can really see that there's quite a few lawns in the United States. This map is from NASA's Earth Observatory, using those shades of green to indicate fractions of U.S. land covered in lawns. And so this includes in residential, industrial, recreation. And so that land use for lawns is really connected to our waterways and water systems. Many of the hot spots with the darker green overlay major watersheds that drain all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. So what we put on our lawns and in our environment matters, and it also might matter downstream as well. Lawns are actually the most irrigated crop in the U.S. So this is just a zoomed in kind of snip of the photo that I showed on the last slide that's zoomed in on Illinois. So lawns in Illinois are really centered around our major cities. So we have, Chicago, St. Louis, and even though a lot of our state is cropland and agricultural land, the lawns and what we do on our lawns still matter for our watersheds. We know that lawns take up a lot of resources. The amount of lawn in the U.S. is more than any other crop and takes up more water than other crops and is irrigated more than other crops in the U.S. as well. Turf grass covers 3 times more area in the U.S. than irrigated corn, so it's a really large percentage. Our lawns are not only resource intensive on our environment, but they're also intensive on our wallet. They cost a lot of money. We tend to throw everything at lawns because we think that this is the schedule that we should be on. And my hope today is to just encourage you to think about your lawn on a more individual basis, so you can make decisions based on your wants and needs. And so there are a lot of hidden costs of lawn care. 3 million tons of fertilizer is applied per year on residential lawns. There's millions of pounds of synthetic pesticides are applied on residential lawns each year as well. And they also use a lot of water with the irrigation. So this workshop, this session today is called Natural Lawn Care, but what really does that mean? The focus of today is really going to be about treating problems and not symptoms. So treating the underlying cause. So given that, soil care is really foundational to your lawn because it's tied to many of the problems that you might have. This program will focus more on the organic and natural side of things to treat those problems and not the symptoms. So, conventional or industrial lawn care approaches are more of a one-size-fits-all approach. And I don't want to make the assumption today that one size will fit everyone's individual circumstances on this call. Conventional and industrial lawn care focuses more on applying products to all lawns and is treating symptoms more in the short term with short-term fixes. And so, for example, You might have a symptom on your lawn like a yellow or a patchy lawn. A conventional solution would be to apply fertilizer right away. A natural lawn care approach would be to possibly get a soil test first and assess the why behind why the lawn is yellowing. The answer at the end might still be applying fertilizer, but by focusing more on, what is happening underneath the symptom, you will be able to make decisions about treatments more informed. So first, we really have to assess what we have in the first place and what we want out of our lawn. So in a natural lawn care assessment, the first thing you want to do is understand your own needs and the needs of your site. So what do you want out of your space? Think about how you want to use it. Do you want to use it for recreation? Is your lawn something that you look at when you are looking out your kitchen window? Would you rather use that space for gardening? All of these different activities can determine how you might manage your space and even the size and scope of your lawn as well. Next, you might want to study your site. This could involve, drawing a map, doing more long-term planning, but you really want to get to know different aspects of your site, from how wet the soil is, or how long, it holds water after the rain, the sunlight, soil conditions, all of that. And lastly, you want to take all of that information so you can prioritize your goals for the site. Not everything is possible all at once in one space based on those environmental and assessment conditions. So, what is a goal that you might have? What is something that you want out of your lawn or your yard? How do you use your lawn right now? If you are at a computer, you can take a second and share in the chat how you use your lawn. And I'll read some of those out loud to folks. Thank you. I see Jamie uses it for dogs, pets, for a vegetable garden, a place for kids and dogs to play, wildlife habitat, gathering place, bringing people together, and just enjoying a place to spend time outside. Thank you all so much for sharing. You can take a look in the chat and see what other folks might have said. Thank you for sharing in the chat about how you're using your lawns. So there are countless reasons why you want your yard in the way that it is, and it's really important to have those ideas in mind and be intentional about them as you're doing your site assessment. Using your space for privacy, outdoor living area, entertainment space for your children and pets is a really important uses. And so this presentation is not about, me telling everyone to get rid of their lawns, but for folks to make intentional decisions about it based on the needs that you all have. So when assessing your site, you want to consider sunlight, soil, drainage, structures, and other conditions. So for light, sunny areas get 6 or more hours of full sun, resulting in warmer, drier soil. Shady areas are more under trees, north-facing walls. And so our turfgrass species really need that full sun in order to thrive. Next, you want to think about your soil conditions and your soil particles. Sandy soil feels gritty, it drains really easily, and works better for more drought-tolerant plants, whereas turfgrass needs a much more consistent moisture level to grow appropriately. Next, pay attention to drainage. Understand how your soil is draining is going to be really critical for you to choose the right plants for the right place, including your turfgrass. If it's really sandy and the water drains too quickly, again, your plants might not be able to absorb enough moisture, so you'll have to water more often. But if it drains too slowly, plants actually will not get enough oxygen to their roots. So pay attention to, especially at this time of year in the spring, what areas of your lawn or your yard are pooling with water, what areas look drier than others. Now's a great time of year to be observing some of these things about your site. Next, you want to pay attention to different structures and obstructions as well. These may shade out certain spots of your lawn, and they can also cause obstructions to your plant's root system. And then some other conditions to be aware of, like salt. Salt is a really big issue in Illinois. This picture here demonstrates really bad salt damage in right off a sidewalk. And so perhaps you live in an area where driveways and sidewalks are heavily salted, and you would want to be considerate about what you're planting in those areas. Another thing that you can do for soils is also get a soil test, especially if you're having problems growing in a certain area. Soil tests can give you information about your soil fertility and nutrient levels as well. And so all of this assessment, from what you want to what's actually happening on your property, should really inform what you want to plant. I like to say, planting the right plant in the right place. Another way to kind of think about this concept is to say, don't fight the site. So if there's a spot in continual shade, maybe sun-loving species isn't the best idea for that space, such as turf grass. That doesn't mean the turf won't grow in another part of your lawn, but that shady space might not be the best for it. Because when you have plants that are matched to their environments, they will require less inputs, less weeding, and have less diseases, because they'll be growing a lot better. And so planting the right plants to the right environment, they will also grow stronger roots, and they're healthier as well. So one of the ways we practice right plant, right place is thinking about planning first and planting once. So by knowing your site and knowing your plants, you can plan for the long term, but, just kind of knowing that things can change. Sometimes that, large tree in your front yard comes down, and what used to be a shade garden is now full sun. These things happen, changes happen, but to the best of your ability, planning first and planting once is going to be best. And, to know your plants, think about the mature size of the plant, so what sun and moisture tolerance it has, and any pest susceptibility as well. And so all of that assessment really leads me to these different strategies that we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation with natural lawn care. So we just talked about the site assessments, and then I will go over some strategies around mowing, water, fertilizers, maintenance, pest management, and a little bit about going beyond the lawn. So one amazing resource that is available to you is the Natural Lawn Care website, Lawn to Lake Midwest by Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. And so a lot of this information can be found on this website here. And so I think this is a great resource. Andrew's going to help me out and put that in the chat for you all, so that you can have this as a reference throughout your natural lawn care journey. So first, let's talk about mowing. So the first strategy is mowing, and that's mowing to 3 inches or 3.5 inches height for the grass. So you really do that because it's better for the plant. So you can tell by this photo here that when the plants are cut a little bit taller, they have better root depth, more photosynthesis is occurring with each grass blade, the plants are less stressed, and they can put more energy into root growth. Increased root growth allows for healthy soil, more water retention. Taller plants also reduce weeds by providing more shade in the ground. With really close and short mowing, that sunlight is going to reach the soil and more weeds are going to sprout from there. But the weeds won't have any light to grow if you're mowing to about 3 to 3.5 inches. Also, because of that shaded soil, you'll need less water for irrigation. When you're mowing, one thing to note is that you really want to use a sharp mowing blade. That's gonna really allow you to save energy on mowing as well. Sharp blades really save energy, and a good rule of thumb is to sharpen them after 14 hours of use. A good time to mow is when the grass is about 4 to 4.5 inches tall, so you're only cutting off about the top third of it at any time. So pictured here shows grass that's cut with a dull blade, so you can see that there's brown frayed tops. So that sharp blade really helps keep your plants healthy as well and helps to keep them from being damaged. When you're mowing, one strategy you can use is to leave your grass clippings. So leaving grass clippings is so much easier than collecting them and disposing of them, and it has so many benefits. This returns organic material and nutrients back to the soil, so you can long-term reduce your fertilizer inputs and costs. Because it's adding organic material back to the soil, it's also helping the soil hold on to more water and nutrients long term. More organic material could help if you have flooding and pooling issues. There is a really common myth around leaving your grass clippings, and that myth is that it causes thatch, and that's not true. Thatch is not the brown clippings that are left behind on your lawn. Thatch is actually a really large mat of roots, and that mat of roots doesn't allow water, air, or nutrients to penetrate into the soil. It's often a result of heavy fertilizer use, infrequent and shallow watering, which leads to low microbial activity in the soil. So there's shallow, the grass roots are growing really shallow and they're not breaking down quickly. So if that thatch layer is thicker than about 1/2 inch, it's time to dethatch. And you can usually do that in, the early spring after heavy rains, early fall, and you can do that by dethatching and aerating as well. One thing that I really have to talk about today, since it is May, is the concept of No-Mow May. I'm sure many of you have heard about No-Mow May. It's something that's really popular, and it was, developed and started in the UK, I want to say in around 2018 or 2019, to help promote resources for pollinators and keep flowering plants in the early spring, so pollinators had resources at that time of year. That's a really great concept, but unfortunately, that doesn't tell the whole story in Illinois. It really is site and climate specific, and it really depends on your landscape. So if you have flowering plants in your lawn in the spring, maybe you do have some clover and dandelions, then yes, it would be a great idea to not mow while those flowers are blooming, so that can be a good early food source for pollinators. If you just have turf, then that's not going to be beneficial, because just letting your grass grow without actually, having any flowers or pollinator resources doesn't really get to the heart of the point of No-Mow May and the No-Mow May movement. Waiting to mow that lawn can also be harmful to your grass. Remember, I said that you shouldn't cut off more than 1/3 of the grass blade at a time. Well, if you are letting it grow all the way, all through May, then you'll be cutting off way more than 1/3 of it at the end of the month. It can cause hay rake. There's too many grass clippings, they don't decompose in a proper timeline. And, just really while it sounds really catchy, it just doesn't tell the whole story in our local climate. And so for northern and central Illinois, something like No-Mow April, when clover and dandelion are more often blooming, might be a better option. In southern Illinois, that might be even earlier, like a No-Mow mid-March through mid-April. It doesn't sound as flashy and exciting, but it gets to kind of the heart of the goal of that program and of that program. So use it really as a tool and think about the why behind it. If you are really interested in No Mow May, you might consider adding more early blooming pollinator resources into your yard and garden too. So there are a lot of good alternatives, and there's been a lot of good information out there this month from some of my fellow Illinois Extension educators that I can put links to in the chat after that talks more about this. But like I said, planting more early blooming plants in your landscape can help provide those pollinator resources, create healthy overwintering habitat, add more low growing flowering plants to your yard, reducing the size of your lawn and replacing it with other plants, and just reducing chemical use overall to help support pollinators and insects. Now I want to talk a little bit about water. So first, let's just think about a situation where maybe you don't have enough water. Maybe your soil is draining too quickly. First, we recommend just letting your lawn go dormant in the summer. Established lawns don't need watering except for in extreme droughts. And this really applies to cool season grasses. If you're using warm season grasses, it's going to depend on your soil type. They're more drought tolerant, but if you have a very sandy soil, you may still have to water. Cool season grasses are much more common in Illinois. So lawns can go dormant. That doesn't mean the turf is dead. It's still alive. It's still healthy. And in the summer, a dormant lawn only needs 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of water every 4 weeks, or every 2 weeks if it's exceptionally hot and exceptionally dry. So this really includes rainwater too. Your lawn then is going to turn green again in cool weather, If you do choose to water and not let your lawn go dormant, a few guidelines you can follow is just that your lawn only needs 1 inch of water a week, and this includes rain again. If the temperatures are really high, you might need to water up to 2 inches. And when you're watering, water deeply and water slowly. This is going to allow for better root growth. So you can see that pictured here. The roots are going to go where the water is. And so by allowing deep infiltration of water, you're going to encourage more deeper rooted turf and deeper rooted plants. Those deeper rooted plants are better drought tolerant and are able to withstand drought longer as well. One important thing is that it's important to be consistent, whether you're letting your lawn go dormant or if you're choosing to water. Once you decide on dormancy or not dormancy, it's important to stick with it. Switching back and forth between heavy watering and no watering is just bad for the turf grass. In both cases, it might be helpful to keep track of rain. You might use a rain gauge. You can also use a tin can too. And the best time of the day to water is going to be in early in the morning. That reduces evaporation, so that money that you're spending on irrigating is actually going to be used by the plants, and so that actually also reduces the risk of disease as well. Now on the flip side, what about if you have too much water? How can you manage that? Generally, ideally, you want to keep as much water on your property and reduce runoff if possible. So some of these strategies here can help reduce pooling, reduce runoff of nutrients, and keep the things that you spend your money on your lawn too. If you're buying fertilizers, compost, etc., which will save you money long term. So you might consider a bioswale or a rain garden. They're combinations of wet, moist-loving plants that can allow for deep infiltration of water. They can be planted, these gardens can be planted directly adjacent to downspouts, to to intercept water before it starts pooling. There's a lot of consideration that goes into installing a rain garden, and some Four Seasons presentations that are posted online will give you more details on how to really build a bioswale or a rain garden. You might also choose permeable pavers. This allows water to infiltrate the soil instead of flowing across pavement. You might redirect and disconnect the downspouts so they don't go directly into the drain sewer, but into the storm sewer, but can go into your lawn or garden. And then you can also manage stormwater on your property by installing a rain barrel. Rain barrel water can be used for irrigating crops in your garden, but should be, special considerations should be made if you wanted to use the rain barrel water for irrigating your vegetables or edible plants. And there's more information about that too. There's also the Stormwater at Home YouTube page that has videos and information that goes into way more detail about all of these topics. We also, with Natural Lawn Care, also recommend these quote-unquote natural fertilizers, right? Grass clippings, top dressing with compost. These aren't considered traditional fertilizers, but because they're providing nutrients and bringing nutrients back to the soil, I like to think of them as also free fertilizer if you're making the compost at your site too. So grass clippings, we already talked about this in the mowing section, but that organic material leaving your grass clippings and returning them to the soil returns nutrients to the soil. And you can also, if you are worried about large patches of grass, you can get mulching lawnmowers that will cut the grass into smaller pieces. Can also top dress lawn areas with compost or mulch leaves. They're just applied to the surface of your lawn in a really thin layer. This also increases organic material and encourages decomposition and encourages microbial activity as well. And so, like I said, if you don't want to buy this compost, if you don't want to buy compost, you can also compost at home. This presentation isn't about composting, but I did want to mention, that composting is really just managed decomposition, and you can manage that decomposition in your own yard and garden. And so there's a lot. Illinois Extension has a lot of composting resources online as well. You can also use fertilizer. If you're choosing to use fertilizer, it's important to note that there are synthetic fertilizers, conventional fertilizers, and also organic fertilizers. The most important thing to pay attention to is those 3 big numbers on your fertilizer bag, whether it's organic or conventional. So complete fertilizers have the 3 primary macronutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Conventional fertilizers often don't have any secondary or micronutrients, but you really want to read the label. Every fertilizer you can buy has an analysis. There's a measure of the percentage of the elements that are in there, and the percentage is expressed in weight. And so you want to follow the label and apply based on what your soil needs. Over applying nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus can cause pollution and can run off. So not only is it damaging the environment, but it's also just kind of money down the drain because you're applying nutrients that you don't need to apply. Organic fertilizers are derived from plants or animals. They usually have lower levels and lower concentrations of the NPK, and they may also have micronutrients as well. When you're fertilizing, you really want to focus on fall fertilizing. That's just the best time to apply fertilizer. And fall fertilizing encourages deeper roots at that time of year. So in the fall, that time of year, grass is putting more energy into its root systems. And so by focusing on fertilizing in the fall, that will lead to better lawn in the spring and in the early spring when our cool season grasses are growing. Another strategy and one maintenance strategy for a healthy lawn is aeration, specifically core aeration. So plants need air in the soil. Roots don't grow like in soil particles. They grow in the air spaces between soil particles. And aeration increases air spaces, which allows for root growth and gas exchange and chemical exchange to occur. Aeration also reduces compaction. Compaction benefits weeds. Some weeds like compacted soil, and so by reducing compaction, you would be reducing the habitat for those plants too, and encouraging your grass to grow better. The holes that are also created with core aeration allows for better water infiltration as well. So it's best to use a core aerator. It's best to use one that has shafts and not spikes. So that way the soil is not just being pushed out of the way, but the soil is being aerated, and you'll get these cores that end up on the surface of the soil. You want to do this when the grass is growing and the soil is moist in the early spring and also in the fall. It's often people combine this with top dressing as well. You can leave those plugs in place. They'll break up as well. And so here's an example of what a core aerator looks like. I know some places you can rent them as well. Another strategy is overseeding. Overseeding can help your turf grow thick so it can outcompete weeds. It makes your lawn, look good and can reduce costs of weed management as well. Replaces old grass as it dies too. The best time to overseed, again, is in the fall. You can overseed in the spring, but it's not necessarily the ideal time because our cool season grasses have been growing. And so as we get into this hotter period of the summer that's going to be starting soon, they'll have a shorter time to establish and a shorter chance of establishing. And so they'll need, if you were to overseed right now, it would just need more maintenance. And that could be a viable option if you have a plan for that maintenance throughout. When it comes to pests and diseases, I did want to mention the integrated pest management approach to weeds and diseases with lawns. And so integrated pest management is really demonstrated through this pyramid here, and where the cultural strategies are at the bottom of the pyramid and should be a majority of the actions that you're taking, with chemical interventions being at the top of the pyramid and being a last resort after you've gone through cultural, mechanical, physical, and biological. So with cultural management, this really focuses on preventing or minimizing pest or disease problems by maintaining your plant health. So choosing that right plant for the right place, for example. Physical or mechanical management, that involves physically eliminating pests and diseases or weeds as well through hand weeding, cultivating, hand picking. Next, there's biological management that really involves utilizing living organisms to manage. So it might involve the introduction of something else, predators, parasites. And lastly and finally, the last and final line of defense should be chemicals like herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. So the bottom of the pyramid really focuses more on prevention, and as you move up, it gears more towards these interventions. That IPM approach to your landscape and to your turf grass really starts with monitoring. You have to know what is there before you can actually manage it. So that means knowing what's growing and when. It also is beneficial to get to know your weeds too. What is it? When does it grow? And why is it out competing the turf grass that you have there? Then lastly is the management aspect of it. And by managing it, you want to focus on the steps with this IPM pyramid. And this kind of brings up the important question about the kinds of judgment calls that I'm asking people to make when they're talking about how to manage their lawns in a more natural approach. And one of those things is going to be with weeds, to really think about the judgment call of, okay, is this a tolerance issue versus a management issue? For example, something like white clover. White clover used to be in turf grass seed mixes and was widely applied to and a part of lawns. Since then, it has gone kind of out of fashion and has come back into fashion again with No May and because of all the benefits of clover. So white clover is a perennial broadleaf, germinates in cool, moist conditions, provides nutrients to your soil and is nitrogen fixing. And so this plant, if you have it in your lawn, I would encourage you to think about, how much of it can you tolerate, because management, it might not be necessary. White clover is more drought tolerant. It provides also pollinator resources as well. Whereas on the other side, something like crabgrass might be a weed that you want to manage. This is a summer annual, germinates in April. And using an IPM approach, first, you want to monitor where is it growing, how much of it is growing, where is it out competing the turf. Think about the cultural things and the cultural activities you can do to prevent it. Maybe you need to mow higher to shade out that crabgrass from germinating, aeration, maybe overseeding your lawn, top dressing to promote a thick, healthy lawn. Maybe there's a biological approach. So for crabgrass specifically, studies suggest that corn gluten meal can be used as a pre-emergent, an organic pre-emergent, but it takes a long time to build up in your soil and a long time to work. And it's also can be pretty expensive. I've definitely seen a lot of success with it, but it's with dedicated success, but that's an option. And then lastly would be the chemical side, treating with a pre-emergent herbicide where it's needed and not just broadcasting it all over your lawn. And so that can really, that kind of approach, that kind of strategy can still help you result in the beautiful, green, healthy lawn that you want, but using a more natural lawn care approach. It's important to understand that the weeds you're specifically targeting and what your goal is as well. And we know that healthy lawns really resist weeds, and using cultural practices like seeding, thinking about soil health and mowing height can help you have and can help result in fewer weeds regardless of what those weeds are. And so you might need to replace old grass by overseeding, improve the nutrients and compaction in your soil, and by changing your mowing height, improve the photosynthesis of your turf grass, for example, so it can outcompete the weeds that are problems. Now I want to talk to you about going beyond the lawn. For the next few slides, we'll just look at some options that are going beyond the lawn and specifically beyond bluegrass. Maybe you still like your lawn and that's great and it provides you what you need from your property, but there might be other species that are more resilient and better suited for your area of Illinois. So Illinois Indiana Sea Grant has resources online about different turf species. So one really common cool season grass that I'm sure most folks have in their yard is Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass requires, higher irrigation inputs and fertilizers compared to other grasses. And so maybe a solution could be to choose mixtures or blends rather than single species. So you can get cool season tall fescue blends, or if you're going for a warm season grass, buffalo grass blends as well. I also wanted to make a note of clover and microclover lawns. So microclover is a variety of clover. It's more drought tolerant than Kentucky bluegrass, but has some pros and cons. So if you came here wanting to know some tips about microclover lawns, I can let you know that, it has a low amount of shade tolerance. So it's not going to be able to grow under your trees or in other really shady areas. But it can be a positive is that it provides pollinator resources with flowers. What I have heard and experienced with microclover lawns is that there is an amount of overseeding that needs to happen consistently, especially to get them to establish, because it can lead to microclover, and adding microclover to your lawn can lead to some ununiform lawns because of patches of microclover and patches of turf grass that might not be well integrated depending on how they grow. In the winter, the top part of microclover dies back, so it can leave bare spots. And sometimes that seed is expensive and it's hard to find. I've really only found it online. I have not seen microclover really being sold in the stores. If you do want to go that route, just be sure that you have the resources for that sort of maintenance and establishment phase, and planting in the early spring to the late summer is best. It always goes back to what you want out of your property and what your main goal is. If one of your main goals is aesthetics or looks, maybe there's other beautiful options out there that could include a smaller lawn. So for example, in this graphic, you can see that there's a lot of unused space in this garden. There's the green grass, might be pleasing to look at, but you can, if it's not being used, you might consider shrinking your lawn and adding more plants. You can add more dimension, more interest, while also making more use of that unused space. And so there's a lot of alternatives to lawn out there. I talked about a few, rain gardens as well. Native plants are great alternatives. They long-term have reduced inputs, require less maintenance after being established, and thinking about choosing the right plant for the right place. Maybe some shade-loving plants, lower light plants, where the grass simply won't grow or is being outcompeted by weeds like creeping Charlie, such as using ferns that is pictured like in the top right over here. So it's really important to note that these gardens and areas, they don't have to look weedy, that there's design elements that go into play. One amazing resource is our Illinois Pollinators website, illinoispollinators.org, that also has some plans and native garden design plans on there as well. So I talked about a lot of different strategies today, most of which are here on this strategy slide. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of what we went over, but this would be a good place to start. Maybe you're considering after today's presentation doing one or two things from this slide to help encourage a more natural lawn care approach. So this webinar is going to be posted online, and all of our past webinars have been posted as well. You can find them on the Four Seasons YouTube page under the Illinois Extension Horticulture page. Thank you all for joining me on this afternoon to talk about natural lawn care. If you want to scan your phone, the photos that you can take this brief survey, we'd really appreciate it. And here is my contact information, along with some other short links to some resources that I mentioned today that you can use for further education.